Hello, this is Herdstone Painting. My name's Mark, and this is our first ever YouTube video. We've been spending quite a bit of time trying to polish this and make it as good as we possibly can. And we'll be painting an Iron Havoc for the Iron Warriors today. However, a little bit of a sort of honest disclaimer. We messed up our first 4 or 5 steps when recording this. It was just a bit too zoomed out, a bit just did not focus. So we've gone back and filmed a tactical marine using to do those first few processes, and then eventually I'll be able to say to you guys, right, we finally got to the Iron Havoc, but all of these rules apply. So what are we doing on Herdstone Painting? We are looking at how we can paint armies quickly but not cutting steps too much, so that we try and keep them looking individual and try and keep them looking nice and battle ready, sure, but also, you know, maybe even display ready if you really want to be. So for this, we've undercoated our Space Marine with Leadbelcher, and then we're dousing him, and I do mean douse, with a mixture of washes. In this case it's Agrax Earthshade and Nuln Oil. And we're kind of mixing and matching it on the miniature. We're taking a little dollop of one and mixing it around with another one. Try not to mix the washes in the pots, and if you want to, you can try different colours. It's to try and get an oily, gritty effect in your shaded recesses. Now we'll try with a trivium of dry brushing, good old-fashioned way of speeding things up, and with the metals it looks great. So we'll start with Leadbelcher straight away, and quite a heavy dry brush. Remember, try not to get your brush wet, try and keep it nice and dry. Take your time and almost feather and dust this around. And with the Leadbelcher you want to go over everything. And our second step is Iron Hand Steel, and we're going to go a little bit lighter, aim for that top, make that top of the model pop a little bit more. This is going to be around the arms, the pauldrons, the head, the backpack, maybe not as much on the legs. You know, the model's focal point is its head and the gun, so everything else can kind of wash away if we need it to. And as you can see, this is pretty rapid to do. And finally, a very light dusting of Stormhost Silver. You almost want this just to be really on those top spots, you know, to really pull out the helmet and everything else on that top level. Okay, tough bit for any model, I think, is starting to get in with the base coating. We've already made a massive dent into the miniature by undercoating in the silver, but now it's time to paint the black, and it's always very difficult to get in there and do this without making mistakes. And if you do, you know, you can always polish back up. But we're going in with Chaos Black, and this will probably be a couple coats, and we want to keep it as smooth as possible as in every location. We'll be painting the left armor pauldron, we'll be painting his right kneecap, and we'll be painting parts of the backpack as well. Now we're going to do a little bit of wet blending, and it seems like that might be a bit extreme for army painting, but I think that for something like a pauldron, where you've got that lovely Iron Warrior logo, what will be going on there later, I think just making a little bit more effort on that space is really important. So it's quite simple to do the Corvus Black and the Chaos Black, and I recommend it to everybody, especially on the pauldrons. I've done it a little bit on the kneecaps as well, but I think that you can coat this initially with Chaos Black, which is a little bit more watered down, and then use Corvus Black, which is equally watered down, and just slowly blend it from the top to the bottom. And if you need to, you can let this dry. It usually dries fairly fast, and do a second coat, and it'll be even better. And it always gives a really lovely matte finish that looks fantastic once the decals are on there. We're going to move to the other pauldron now, and as is right, it will be Averland Sunset. This will need a couple of coats, again, water it down. We want to make sure it's nice and smooth. And unlike the other pauldron, we'll need some wash, so we can use Seraphin Sepia. We don't want anything too orange for this yellow, because it will just look bizarre. We want to keep it quite dark and quite muddy, and Seraphin Sepia is a lovely wash. over an Averland Sunset base. Right, now the pauldrons are base coated, we're going to go in and actually start edge highlighting the blacks. So to start off with, we're going to get in there with some Dark Reaper. And then we're going to paint all the little rivets and a lot of the edges as per standard for edge highlighting. It's a bit of a time sink, unfortunately, doing this, but it just makes the black look a lot better. And we've saved so much time with the silver that it's worth doing. And on the pauldrons, we'll try and paint a thin line just in from the rim. So it's not going to be right in the edges. We're just going to paint a slight line like this all the way around. And on the backpack, there are a lot of edges. It's probably one of the most time-consuming pieces of this process. But yeah, take your time. Go around every single edge with the Dark Reaper. And when it's done, we'll move on to the next step. Which, of course, is a watered-down Thunderhawk blue. And we're just going to pick out the rivets again, and then the extreme edges, make sure it's as narrow as you can. On the pauldrons, we'll just paint the corners and the very top of the line. So follow the line you've already drawn, and take your time. Of course, the wet blended section is a bit of a problem to redo, but it doesn't take too long if you do make a mistake. If you want to do any scratches or cuts, now's the time to do it on the black sections. Back to the other pauldron, we want to bring that Averland Sunset back in, so paint that all the way to the edge, leaving a slight slither of that Seraphin Sepia. You may need to do 2 coats, but see how you feel with the finish. It does tend to cover quite well, but because we've watered it down, you probably do want to do 2 coats. And following the process for the left pauldron as he stands, we want to do a thin line with Ethereal Yellow in the same vein around the edges so that they match. And then finally, in the corners, as per the Thunderhawk blue, we want to use Flash Gits Yellow in them edges and across the top of that line. Of course, scratches, little bits of battle damage can be done here. I'll tend to just paint some very small things in. You could sponge some bits and bobs here as well, if you wanted to, whatever takes your fancy. Finally, we've actually now got to the Iron Havoc. We readjusted the camera setup, and when we were filming, realizing the first 5-6 steps were not too good. So some of the shots are a little bit fuzzy and out of focus, so I do apologize. But we're going to be doing some hazard stripes. Now, Iron Warriors are fairly straightforward, but the hazard stripe bit is really complicated. So you've got to take your time with this. Unfortunately, there's no masking tape or just system to paint across a circle like this, or this kind of spherical shape. It's very fiddly. What I have sort of realised is that you can use the rivets on the rim of the pauldron as a bit of a guide. So I'll tend to do the sort of bottom right rivet across to the second one down for that first line, and just take your time. It is tough, but if you kind of very steady and you think about the placement of the brush, keep the miniature in a certain way, held a certain way, and how you're using your hands with that brush, you can just sweep across. And we're painting lots of these. You don't all have to have hazard stripes. I'll show you later that some of them I've done different things just to kind of get that yellow and black colour into them. But when there's lots of them, it will be very striking. They're not all heroes, they're not all tanks. What we will do though, once that black is dry, and it may take 2 coats, hopefully the black for you guys will cover a lot, just cover very well over the yellow. But what I'll do is I get a line of Dark Reaper across the top of each of these lines, just the top. And we don't need Thunderhawk blue, just something to make them look a bit more realistic. Now the has a stripe there, of course, all finished. Hopefully it looks quite striking, quite straightforward, but it does look better once the rim is painted. But before we can do that, their helmets have like a crown of brass above it, and it's easier to paint the lens while that isn't painted. So we're going to get in now and get some Khorne Red, paint the lens, and whilst we're doing that, paint all the wires slash tubes slash connectors that are all over their body. There's 2 on the backpack, there's multiple different positions of them on the legs, and you can also find them on the arms. So take your time, paint these in. You may need 2 coats, but generally the reds cover really well. So that is the next step. And when your Khorne Red is dry, grab a bit of Bezerker Bloodshade, Bezerker Shade, Bezerker Bloodshade, I think it's called, and just fill that visor and wash all of those wires and cables. Stupidest wash name, I think. Back to the Khorne Red. We just want to basically overpaint this, just leaving the Bloodshade in their deepest recesses, and leave the visor. Just the tubes and wires need to be painted with the Khorne Red. Now we're painting the visor, and I mean, for the purposes of this video, I'm going quite intensive with it, but you could probably get away with just this colour, Evil Sun Scarlet, and we're just getting a very small brush. This is a Winsor & Newton, don't often use it, but I'm just going to draw sort of a line across, say draw, paint a line, but we're drawing a line across that lens from left to right, leaving a load of that shade in the edges. And then what we'll do is we'll narrow that line down further each time. So now we'll go to Troll Slayer Orange. We're going to kind of paint back over that line we've made, but only closer to the middle. So we're going to maybe do 50% of the lens here in the orange. And then when that's done, we're just going to get a teeny bit of white scar and just do the very middle of this line, just to make it look like this lens is glowing. Of course, this is all extra stuff. You could obviously get away with just the Khorne Red and a bit of the Evil Sun Scarlet, and it'll look fine across a squad of 10 of these guys. Now, moving on to the Runelord Brass. Because this is our first metallic we're actually painting with, we don't put the metallics into the wet palette. Everything else we have done, we've dry brushed the metals already, but the Runelord Brass is just going to sit in our little tray here, and we'll water it down a touch. You don't want to water down metallic paints too much because they separate like crazy and they're almost unusable. You kind of have to let them be quite sticky, which is why a lot of folks don't like them. But of course, for purposes of what we're doing, which is trying to paint armies quickly, they're perfect. So we're going to paint this, take our time, and keep adding water, a little bit here and there. Don't let it dry too much. As you're going, keep adding water to that little supply. Then we're going to paint the rims of the pauldrons. They've got a collar underneath their neck, and then they've got the crown on their head. And that's it. Not a lot of brass, which is a surprise. A lot of these Space Marine boys have like trim everywhere. These guys do not have much, so that is massively helpful. Once your Runelord Brass is dry, you could do 2 coats. I tend to find the metal paints dry very well, but see where you are, see if there's any bits that have got a bit patchy. But before you do, once you've done that, you want to get some Seraphin Sepia and apply it all over the trim. Man, Seraphin Sepia just makes the Runelord Brass pop so nicely. Marvellous combo. Now, you could do a lot more steps here. You know, go back in with the Runelord Brass or go back in with a mixture of this and some silver, but because of what we're trying to do and what we're trying to achieve, I tend to find the wash does a lot of the work for you, and you kind of want a nice warm brass with these guys. So we're going in with Stormhost Silver and our Windsor and Newton brush here again. And we're doing a lot of the edges, just all the edges, all the rivets. You know, we take being selective, but just trying to get it all done as quickly as we can. And with that, our Space Marine chap is pretty much finished, except for the gun. So the schools of thought for leaving the guns off, leaving them on. In this case, I tend to leave them on. There's a lot of sins you can hide behind the guns. The spray paint and the washes do a lot of the work, but I tend to find the guns are their own little characters, so they need their own work, really. So the autocannon's obviously such a iconic symbol and silhouette, so we're going in and painting it with Iron Warriors to darken it down so it's darker than the Iron Warrior himself, and it's nice to use the name of the paint that matches the Legion. And once that Iron Warrior is dry, we're just washing with Nuln Oil. So no mixing of paints, we're not making them oily and greasy with different colours, we're just washing with the Nuln Oil here. Now, instead of dry brushing like we did with the Space Marine himself, we're actually going to just paint Iron Hand Steel in, and we've watered this down a bit more than maybe we should do. We're going to do a few coats. We want to make sure that the barrel specifically is really nicely painted. I think this took 2 coats just to make sure it was a nice solid silver, including the barrel and the muzzling of this thing. Then we've gone around and just painted the Iron Hand Steel almost like an overlayer, leaving the Iron Warrior and leaving the Nuln Oil in the recesses only. This kind of gives it more of a solid effect, like it's a cast iron piece, as opposed to a greasy, oily Space Marine. And then in our Trivium, a bit of Stormhost Silver, and picking out all the little nuts and bolts, and flaps, and what else, all these things. Who knows if they're actually required for this thing to fire. It's a plastic gun at the end of the day. I'm sure they don't. But yeah, go in, add a little highlight to that cartridge, and then you want to grab the Stormhost Silver again and just do the top 25% of the barrel. Just that top section to make it look like it's being illuminated by the sky. A little bit of a cheeky trick, but it looks nice across the unit when there's all of them together. Again, apologies for things going in and out of focus. It was our first real attempt painting under a camera, and it is hard. Really hard to get used to painting in a different way, but a lot of fun. Things will get better as we keep doing this, I hope. Okay, next up, we missed the Warplock Bronze filming bit, but the recoiler, I believe it's called, recoiler, the big the puffy bit in the middle, we painted with Warplock Bronze, and then the kind of, I guess, trim, again, as per our Space Marine in Runelord Brass. Now we're going to do our washes on these two. Nuln Oil on the Warplock Bronze recoiler thing, don't know what it's called, and then Seraphin Sepia on the Runelord Brass sections. Basically following the process that we did on the model there, but the Warplock Bronze just gives it a different colour, changes the gun a little bit, gives it something extra, rather than it being more silver and more black or whatever. Just something a bit different, like a dark brown effectively. Highlighting, again as mentioned, Stormhost Silver on the Runelord Brass sections, paint them rivets, and you want to pick the front of all of these rings and just paint a line around the rings, one side, and match those sides of course, so don't alternate. Keep it all on one edge. And then funnily enough, our highlight for the Warplock Bronze is actually Runelord Brass. It just looks great. And in this case we just want to do the top 25 to 30% of that top. Nothing more. And then, my friends, we're back to blocking in black. Sorry, it's tough and frustrating, but 2 thin coats of Chaos Black. I did struggle to work out on these which bits should be the black casing. I think I've got it right. It's hard to describe, but it seems to be all around the hand and up the side and around the back, so take your time. There's a few sort of flaps and coils and things that you want to leave in silver, but if you do catch them, just paint back over them with Stormhost Silver and you should be able to hide a multitude of sins. But take your time with this. It is the last step other than basing and everything else. So once that black is dry, back to Corvus Black, and we're not doing any blending, just like the backpack. We're just going to do a simple Corvus Black highlight, and call it a highlight, let's call it a layer, but it's kind of picking an area to just make Corvus Black. In this case, the autocannon has a tapered top, and I'm painting the entire tapered section in the Corvus Black, and that will just sit over the other black section really lovely. Again, sorry about dropping off screen, not very helpful, I am sorry. And as per the rest of the Space Marine, kind of tying them together, Dark Reaper, just paint around the edges, all of the rivets, all of the edges that we can. But what we can do is not paint or not highlight the bottom edges. So we don't want to do an edge highlight on the bottom, we just want the top edges that we can see. And then the final kiss with Thunderhawk Blue on those rivets, and then the extreme edges. You don't have to paint everything, just those corners will be perfect. So, I usually paint, well, I'm trying to paint a whole squad at the same time, to give you guys an idea of the timings of how to paint, in this case, an Iron Havoc unit for the Iron Warriors. I know this is a sort of legacy PDF unit, but I'm sure there will be rules for them in the future. This is a beautiful piece of artwork of an Iron Warrior with their autocannon. I'll never, always remember. But there is a few extra pieces that these guys have, so you can use this process with other lenses that are red using the previous colors, but we're going to paint the little displays and kind of, I guess, the little monitors that are on this chap and his friend here with his little Pokédex. I don't know what it's called, something stupid. So yeah, Stegadon scale green, just gets to be painted all over these. If you need 2 coats, you need 2 coats, but it should be, one should be plenty. And then we want to get some Nuln Oil, and we kind of want to drip this on. We don't necessarily want to wash it. We almost want to pin drop it on, and so that we get some kind of like area of the screen and the lenses that are, you know, darker, like a dark blob on them. And then when that's dry, we want some Cabalite green. We want to paint the top and side of these 2 lens elements, almost like an upside down L shape. And then we want to paint the same thing, an upside down L shape, on our monitor or Pokédex. And then what we can do is just do a few extra lines to make it look like it's analysing the terrain or analysing some enemy vehicle or analysing a Pokemon, maybe. Next up, Gauss Blaster Green, probably one of the best Citadel colours, I think. A lovely aqua. And we want to follow that upside down L shape that we've made, but we want to just make it smaller. And on our Pokédex, we want to just do the top corner as well. And finally, to finish, white scar. You can just go in the corners of the display, the top left of our L, and then the opposite corner, and then our little display elements or little monitor elements at the top. It can just go in the same, right at the corner of the L, and then at the bottom where it's quite dark, so it makes it look more like a glass display. And that's it. That was all of our Iron Havoc finished. I hope that you've enjoyed the video. We really enjoyed making it. We've learned a lot. This is a real prototype and a kind of initial pass on how we would want to do videos going forward. So if you're into it and you fancy keeping an eye on what we're up to, then subscribe away. If not, then thanks for stepping by. Oops. And there we have it. These guys took about 3.5 hours to paint all 10. Batch painting, of course, which I feel is quite reasonable. After we finished the painting, there was a few additional steps. You know, we've finished the bases. We had a little bit extra texturing and some tufts. Painted them rims in Chaos Black. We've additionally glossed any areas where we're going to place a decal, and that helps the decal to adhere to the miniature a lot better. And we've used micro sol, micro set, that combination with all of these decals or decals, and it's really needed for the Iron Warrior one. It's quite large, so you really need to take your time. I think these took 3 layers of micro sol at the end, but the gloss just allows it to slip over the model. And then we've just gone over with, once everything's dry, some matte varnish. I used the Vallejo matte varnish with a brush and just pop back in and remove any excess, and then the gloss varnish on any of the visors and lenses, both the Stegadon scale green and Khorne Red bits. So yeah, an absolute pleasure to paint. I think you can see here the hazard stripes I've done mostly on them for most of them, but some of them I've done some little variations, added in some extra decals in there to make them look a bit different. But that's it. Hope you've enjoyed. Bye bye.